Have you ever wondered why the universal symbol for healing features a serpent? To find the answer, we have to look at the most terrifying paradox in ancient scripture. The highest order of beings, the Seraphim, aren't just burning ones. The Hebrew root literally describes a venomous, flying snake. While modern art has softened them into gentle figures, the biblical reality is far more predatory. They are fiery guardians that mirror the lethal protectors of Pharaoh's throne. Today, we're stripping away the folklore to decode the actual, high-dimensional mechanics of the angelic realm. Now that we've looked at the staggering appearance of these beings, we need to ask a much bigger question, one that most people completely overlook. Why? If God is truly all-powerful and all-knowing, why does he need a middle management? Why go through the trouble of creating an entire bureaucracy of spirits to carry out his will when he could just think it into existence? To understand this, we have to look at the angelic realm not as a collection of magical creatures, but as a sophisticated system of celestial governance. You see, the Bible describes a reality that is far more organized than we often realize. It's less like a fantasy novel and more like a high-level administrative structure where authority is delegated for a very specific reason. Think of it this way. If an absolute infinite power were to interact directly with our finite world, the sheer voltage of that presence would simply trity us. We see hints of this throughout the Old Testament. Whenever the raw glory of God enters a space, people don't just feel at peace. They often fall on their faces in terror or find themselves physically unable to stand. This is where the angels come in. They act as reality buffers or spiritual power transformers. They lower the intensity of the divine so that it can interact with human history without shattering the fabric of our existence. But there's a deeper, more fascinating reason for this hierarchy, and it has everything to do with the paradox of delegation. In any great empire or corporation, the leader delegates power to representatives. Why? Because it allows for a structured order where different parts of the system can function with a degree of autonomy. The Bible tells us in the book of Daniel that this isn't just about passing notes, it's about governing territories. Take the archangel Michael, for instance. We usually think of him as a lone warrior with a sword, but the scripture gives us a much more political job description. In Daniel 10, he's called the prince who stands for the people of Israel. Now that word prince in the Hebrew context implies a high-ranking administrator or a regional governor. And he isn't the only one. The text mentions a prince of Persia and a prince of Greece. But here's the kicker. These weren't human kings. These were spiritual beings, delegates who had been granted authority over specific nations. This reveals a complex, unseen map of spiritual provinces. God has organized the unseen realm into a system of authorized representatives. Michael isn't just a soldier. He is Israel's spiritual, legal representative in the heavenly court. So when we see Michael fighting the Prince of Persia, we're actually witnessing a spiritual territory dispute. It shows us that God's governance is intentional. He doesn't just micromanage every atom from a distance. He has built a system where these powerful beings oversee different aspects of our reality. It's a celestial council where decisions are made and battles are fought on a scale we can barely imagine. However, this system of delegating authority comes with a massive inherent risk, a risk that explains almost everything wrong with our world. When you grant a being real power and real authority, you also give them the freedom to use it. This is the hidden variable of the angelic realm. Because these governors have a degree of autonomy, they have the capacity to choose. This is exactly what happened with the beings the Bible calls the rulers and authorities of this dark world. Some of these high-ranking administrators decided they didn't want to represent the throne anymore. They wanted to take the throne for themselves. This wasn't just a bad attitude, it was a full-scale systemic failure. It was a coup within the celestial government. This is why Michael's role is so vital. He is the loyal commander who maintains the integrity of the original system. He represents the loyalist faction of the government, ensuring that the rebellion doesn't go unchecked. By looking through this lens of governance, we stop seeing angels as random occurrences and start seeing them as the infrastructure of reality itself. They are the gears and circuits that allow the will of the Creator to manifest in a world of space and time. But as we're about to see, the further up this chain of command you go, the less these beings look like officials, and the more they look like something that defies every law of physics we know. To see how deep this rabbit hole goes, we have to move past the soldiers and messengers and look at the beings that actually power the throne itself. Beings that don't move like anything on this earth. To understand the most high-ranking beings in the heavenly court, we have to leave the humanoid disguises behind and step into a realm where the laws of physics, as we know them, simply cease to exist. If the messenger angels we met earlier are the ground forces that we can somewhat perceive, the beings we're about to encounter are so far beyond our sensory limits that they literally cause the prophets who saw them to experience a total cognitive crash. The most bizarre of these are the Ophanim. They only appear in 2 passages in the entire Bible, both in the book of Ezekiel, which, let's be honest, is one of the wildest books you'll ever read. In Ezekiel 1, he describes seeing these massive intersecting wheels. He says their construction was like a wheel within a wheel, and that their rims were tall and awesome, and covered in eyes all the way around. Now, when we hear wheels, we think of a chariot or a bike. But Ezekiel says these things didn't turn when they moved. They just went in whichever direction the Spirit moved, as if they were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. This is where things get truly mind-bending. To understand what Ezekiel was actually looking at, we have to look past the biological monsters and use a little bit of higher dimensional math. Think about it this way. Imagine a flatland world, a 2D sheet of paper where people are just flat shapes. If you, a 3D person, poked your finger through that paper, the 2D people wouldn't see a finger. They would see a mysterious circle suddenly appear out of thin air, grow larger, and then disappear. They wouldn't have the bandwidth to perceive a 3D finger. They would only see a 2D slice of it. Now, apply that to the Ophanim. Most scholars and physicists who look at this description today realize that Ezekiel wasn't describing a mechanical object, but a 4-dimensional projection. In geometry, if a 4D cube, called a tesseract or a hypercube, rotates through our 3D space, it appears exactly like a cube within a cube, with parts intersecting and shifting through one another without ever actually turning in the way we understand. When Ezekiel saw wheels within wheels that could move in any direction simultaneously, he was likely witnessing a higher dimensional being poking through the fabric of our 3D reality. And what about the eyes that covered their rims? In a 3D world, eyes are biological organs. But in a 4D context, an eye represents a point of observation. A being in the 4th dimension can see the inside and outside of a 3D box at the same time. To a human observer like Ezekiel, that level of omniscience, the ability to perceive every angle and every data point simultaneously, would look exactly like a surface covered in VOSO observation points. It's not that the being is a literal monster with thousands of eyeballs. It's that it has a sensory reach that covers the entire 360-degree spectrum of our reality at once. But there's how does this description feel so terrifying? Why did Ezekiel, and later Daniel, essentially faceplant into the floor the moment they saw Nyungtunai? We usually call this holy fear, but from a cognitive perspective, it's more like a systemic hardware failure. Our brains are hardwired to process 3D space and linear time. When a prophet like Ezekiel is given a glimpse into the throne room, he's trying to download a 4D or 5D data stream into a 3D processor. It's a cognitive crash. Your brain hits a 404 error because it doesn't have the categories to process what no is seeing. This is what we call linguistic residue. Ezekiel used words like wheels, bronze, and eyes, not because they were literal, but because those were the only 3D labels his brain could find to describe a reality that was infinitely more complex. This is the ontological shock. The reason angels always have to start with, "Do not be afraid," isn't just because they look scary. It's because their very presence is an invasion of a higher reality into our lower one. It's like trying to run a supercomputer's worth of data through a 1990s dial-up modem. The system just shuts down. The cherubim are no different. Ezekiel describes them as having born faces, a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. Again, if we think biologically, that's just a weird chimera. But if we think dimensionally, having 4 faces that look in every direction at once is just another way of describing a being that isn't limited by a single perspective. They aren't steeds or horses pulling a carriage. They are the living, high-dimensional power source that supports the very presence of God. When you realize that Tuktenai are actually the high-tech, multi-dimensional infrastructure of the universe, it changes how you see the Bible stories. They aren't just spirits floating around. They are the guardians of the boundary between our world and the Vohan. But if these beings are so complex and so terrifying that even looking at them causes a mental breakdown, why is it that we've spent the last few centuries painting them as chubby babies with tiny wings? There is actually a very specific and slightly dark psychological reason why we've domesticated Nung Tukte Vutrunai. And to understand that, we have to look at how the human ego handles things it can't control. So we've talked about the hardware, the bizarre geometry, and the multidimensional eyes. But how does this celestial machinery actually work in our everyday world? To understand that, we have to stop looking at angels as simple characters in a story and start seeing them as information flows from the throne. If the sovereign is the source of all authority, then angels are the packets of data that execute his will across the fabric of space and time. When we analyze the Bible, we can actually categorize these operations into 3 distinct states of data flow, and it's way more fascinating than just magic. The first state is what we'll call guidance. This is the classic role of the Malachim, the messengers. But think about the actual mechanism of a message from the spiritual realm. When the angel Gabriel appears to Daniel in chapter 9, he doesn't just hand over a physical scroll. He tells Daniel that he has come to give him insight and understanding. This is a direct data transfer. It's an angelic interface being used to upload a complex prophetic timeline directly into a human consciousness. It's not just a conversation, it's a synchronization of our limited human timeline with the eternal perspective of the throne. The second state is where things get really cool and a bit sci-fi. We can call this intervention. These are the mission angels sent to change the physical world. Most of us grew up hearing Sunday school stories like Daniel in the lion's den or Peter escaping from prison. But if we look at the physics of it, these aren't just miracles. They are localized suspensions of the laws of nature. In Acts chapter 12, when Peter is chained between 2 soldiers, an angel appears and the chains literally fall off his hands. Then the massive iron gate of the city opens by itself. These beings are essentially operating on the source code of our reality. They can reach into our 3D environment and bend the probability of matter and force, allowing them to manipulate the physical world without leaving any trace of how they did it. Then there's the third state, and it's the one that should honestly give us chills: purification, or what we usually call judgment. If the universe is a massive system, then these angels are the system cleaners. Their job is to remove anomalies, individuals, or even entire armies that threaten to corrupt the sovereign's ultimate plan. Think about the angel who struck down Herod Agrippa in Acts 12, or the one who decimated the Assyrian camp in a single night in 2 Kings 19. This isn't just random violence. It's a high-level administrative delete command. They are the enforcers of cosmic order, making sure the system doesn't crash before the final objective is reached. But here is the most interesting part. This information flow doesn't just happen in ancient history. It might be happening all around us right now. Think about those glitch in the matrix stories we've all heard. The stranger in disguise, who shows up at the exact second a tragedy is about to occur, leads someone to safety, and then disappears before a single thank you can be said. If angels are higher dimensional beings, they don't need to walk away into the distance. They simply phase out of our 3D perception. Those encounters are like random contact points where the reality buffer we discussed earlier briefly overlaps with our daily lives. They are the silent hands reaching through the veil to nudge a steering wheel or whisper a warning, keeping the grand narrative on track without ever revealing the complexity behind the curtain. It's an incredible, high-stakes system of governance. But if these beings are so active, so powerful, and so terrifyingly efficient, why is it that our culture has spent the last few centuries trying to make them look, well, harmless? Why did we trade these system enforcers for chubby babies with tiny wings? To find the answer, we have to look at a very specific and slightly dark psychological strategy that humanity uses to cope with things we can't control. So we have to look at the massive gap between the eldritch, multi-dimensional reality we've been exploring and the way we usually see angels today. If these beings are truly the terrifying, high-voltage enforcers of the celestial court, how on earth did we end up with the precious moments version? I mean, think about it. We've gone from burning serpents and wheels within wheels to chubby toddlers with tiny wings on Valentine's Day cards. This isn't just a mistake in art history. It's actually one of the most successful psychological defense strategies in human history. To understand this, we need to talk about a concept in evolutionary psychology called Kindchenschema, or the baby schema. You see, our brains are biologically hardwired to respond to certain physical traits, like big eyes, round faces, and small limbs, with a feeling of nurturance and safety. When we see these traits, our fear response shuts down and our protective response kicks in. It's why we find puppies and babies adorable rather than threatening. Now, apply that to the angelic. In the early days of the church and throughout the medieval period, art actually stayed much closer to the biblical description. Angels were depicted as imposing, powerful, and often quite strange. But as we moved into the Renaissance and the Baroque periods, something shifted. Artists like Raphael began to populate their masterpieces with these little winged infants called putti. Wait a second, why would we do that? Why would we take a cherub, a multi-faced guardian of the divine throne that literally kept humanity out of Eden with a flaming sword, and turn him into a Cupid? The answer is simple. We wanted to domesticate the sacred. This is a classic perspective shift. You see, facing the sublime, the terrifyingly beautiful and overwhelming presence of the infinite is exhausting. It's humbling to the point of being painful. If an angel is a high-dimensional enforcer of cosmic judgment, then every time you think about them, you're reminded of how small, how fragile, and how judged you actually are. That's a lot of pressure for a Tuesday morning prayer session. So humanity subconsciously performed a collective act of kawaii-ization. By shrinking the angelic host down to the size of an infant, we effectively strip them of their authority. We turn the secret service of heaven into spiritual pets. It's much easier to feel blessed by a cute, harmless baby than it is to be confronted by a seraphim that is literally radiating the unapproachable holiness of the Creator. This was a brilliant psychological shield. We transformed a system enforcer into a source of comfort. By making them cute, we made them controllable. In our minds, we moved the angels from the category of terrifying reality into the category of religious ornamentation. We traded the ontological shock of Ezekiel's vision for a sense of cozy, domestic safety. But here's the problem, and it's a big one. When we domesticated the angels, we lost something vital. We lost the sense of the sublime. The sublime is that feeling you get when you stand at the edge of a massive canyon or look up at a billion stars in a clear night sky. It's that mix of awe and terror that reminds you that you are part of something much, much bigger than yourself. By turning the celestial army into a nursery, we've inadvertently made our own universe feel smaller. We've traded the vast, complex, and high-stakes celestial governance for a version of spirituality that doesn't challenge us. We've shielded ourselves from the burning ones so effectively that we've forgotten what it feels like to be truly awestruck. We've built a psychological wall of cuteness to hide the fact that we are living in a reality that is far more intense and demanding than we care to admit. However, there is one character in this story that we could never quite cutify. There is one figure who breaks through this entire psychological defense, who refuses to be shrunk down into an ornament, and who represents the ultimate breach of the reality buffer we talked about earlier. To understand the final piece of this puzzle, we have to look at the one angel who didn't just bring a message or perform a mission, but who actually stepped out of the bureaucracy and took a seat right in the middle of our mess. To see the true face of the sovereign, we have to look at the moment the high-voltage energy of the throne finally touched the ground. So, we've spent this entire journey looking at the gears and the soldiers of the celestial court. We've seen the voltage transformers, the high-dimensional wheels, and the terrifying biological chimeras that guard the throne. But there is one figure who completely breaks every rule we've discussed so far. A figure that doesn't just represent the sovereign, but speaks with a voice that is indistinguishable from the sovereign himself. Throughout the Old Testament, there is a recurring character known as the angel of the Lord. Now remember what we said earlier. The word angel just means messenger. It's a job description, not a species. But this specific messenger is different. In every other case, an angel says, "Thus says the Lord." They are the mail carriers of heaven. But the angel of the Lord, he shows up and says, "I am." Think about Hagar in Genesis 16. She's alone in the desert, and this angel finds her and promises to multiply her offspring, a power that belongs exclusively to the Creator. Or look at the famous burning bush in Exodus chapter 3. The text says, "The angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in the flames." But a few verses later, the voice from the bush says, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Do you see the paradox? In part 2, we talked about the necessity of delegation. We established that the raw voltage of the infinite is too intense for our 3D reality. So God uses buffers, angels, to bridge the gap. But in these moments, the boundary between the messenger and the master starts to blur. It's as if the king decided to take off his crown, step out of the high-security throne room, and walk onto the battlefield himself. This is the ultimate system breach. For a long time, scholars have struggled to categorize this. Is it just a very high-ranking angel? Or is it something more? When you look at the evidence, the most fascinating conclusion is that this angel of the Lord is actually a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ. Now, why does this matter for our understanding of the scary angels we've met today? Because it solves the greatest problem humanity has ever faced. We looked at the Ophanim and the cherubim, beings so complex and unhuman that looking at them causes a total cognitive crash. We established that the supernatural is terrifying because it is too much for our senses. The fire of the Seraphim is a fire of pure, unapproachable holiness. If we were to stand in that throne room, the sheer data stream of God's presence would disintegrate us. We've spent centuries cutifying angels because we are fundamentally terrified of that intensity. But here is where the story takes its most mind-blowing turn. The sovereign realized that while his angels could bring messages, perform missions, and execute judgments, they could never truly bridge the gap of love. A buffer can protect you from the fire, but it also keeps you away from the heat. So the king of all the angels did the unthinkable. He broke his own rules of celestial governance. He didn't send a seraph to cleanse us with a coal. He didn't send Michael to win a military victory for our souls. Instead, he bypassed the entire bureaucracy. He stepped out from behind the wheels within wheels and the six-winged guardians, and he compressed himself. He took all that infinite, high-dimensional energy, the power that makes the Ophanim spin and the Seraphim shout, and he down-converted it. He became a lowly 3D human being. This is the ultimate intersection. The ultimate intersection. Jesus Christ is the voltage transformer of divine love. He is the only version of the infinite that we can touch without melting into soup, as we jokingly said earlier. When you look at Jesus, you are seeing the same power that Daniel saw in his terrifying vision. The skin like burnished bronze, the eyes like flaming torches, but it is now filtered through a human heart. The scary reality of the Bible's angels serves a vital purpose. It shows us the sheer scale of the God we are dealing with. It reminds us that we are not the center of the universe and that the spiritual realm is not a playground. It is a vast, organized, and terrifyingly powerful kingdom. But the climax of the story is that the ruler of that kingdom made himself small so that we wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. When Jesus stood at the tomb of Lazarus or shared a meal with outcasts, he was still the commander of the Lord's army. He was still the one the cherubim guard with their lives. But he lowered the voltage so far that we could finally call the infinite Father. The cross wasn't just a human execution. It was the moment the highest authority in the universe bore the judgment that his own angels were created to execute. He took the information flow of wrath upon himself so that the only flow we would receive is grace. So the next time you think of an angel, don't think of a harmless baby with a harp. Think of the Ophanim, the massive eye-covered wheels that move with the spirit of the Creator. Let that awe and that sublime fear hit you. Let it remind you of how vast the unseen realm truly is. But then, remember that the King who commands those wheels chose to walk in our dust. He ruled over every seraph, every cherub, and every archangel we've met today. And yet, if you put your faith in him, he promises that you will one day reign alongside him over all of them. The celestial court is real, the army is vast, and the mechanics of reality are far more cool than we ever imagined. And the best part? The King is on your side. Thanks for watching, guys. And as always, if you haven't seen our breakdown of the Abyss yet, you definitely need to check that out next. It ties all of this together in a way that is, well, super cool. See you in the next one.